Personal trauma or military sexual trauma cases can be some of the most difficult cases to win service connection for in the VA system. Difficult, but not impossible. Welcome to VA Made Easy. I'm VA-accredited attorney and U.S. Army combat veteran Ed Farmer. Today, we're going to talk about the type of evidence you could use to win your personal trauma or military sexual trauma case. If you've been denied your VA disability case, visit me at vetlawoffice.com. I not only provide zealous advocacy, I'll prep you for your CMP exams, so we have access to medical nexus opinions, and we have legal investigators that help obtain those buddy statements. Schedule a free consultation at vetlawoffice.com, but for now, let's get into it. All right, so before we discuss what type of evidence you could use to win your personal trauma or military sexual trauma case, let me clear up a common misconception. So when you start to apply for this, you're not actually applying for MST or military sexual trauma. MST or military sexual trauma is actually the in-service event that occurred. What you should be applying for is the disability that resulted from that trauma. Typically, this is a mental health issue such as PTSD, but it could also be other things. So when you fill out that application, I wouldn't put just MST. I would put the actual disability you believe is caused from MST. All right, so typically these cases are extremely difficult to win because they go unreported. People are ashamed, they're embarrassed, they fear retribution, so they keep it to themselves. So the VA has relaxed evidentiary procedures in place to help you win these claims, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So the first type of evidence you could use to help win your personal trauma or military sexual trauma is called behavioral markers. And this is evidence that's outside of your official military personnel file. It's circumstantial evidence that could help support what actually happened, and that's okay. That's the type of evidence that you could use to win your MST case. So here are some examples of what these behavioral markers look like. So one, a deterioration in work performance. So maybe you were a squared away soldier, winning all sorts of awards, max your PT test, great evaluations, and all of a sudden you start having issues with your job, your evaluations went down. That could be evidence that something's going on with you, that there is a behavioral change due to something that may have occurred, i.e. the personal or sexual trauma. You may request a transfer outside your unit in an attempt to try to get away from that perpetrator, that person who harmed you. Sudden disciplinary issues. Again, maybe you were a squared away soldier or service member, and now you're starting to get in trouble. You got NJPs. You're not the service member you once were. Sudden substance abuse issues. So maybe you start having alcohol or drug-related issues out of nowhere. That could be a sign or a behavioral marker that something occurred. Sudden depression or anxiety without any sort of identifiable cause. You start getting treated for depression or anxiety and can't really pinpoint what's going on with you. Or social changes. Maybe you were very outgoing and all of a sudden you've become really isolated. Again, this could be evidence that something occurred and it's affecting your behavior or personality. Those are all markers that could be used to prove that a personal trauma or military sexual trauma occurred. Next, there's other markers that you could use to help prove that this personal trauma or military sexual trauma occurred. So one, diaries or journals. Maybe you journaled about what happened. You could use that as evidence that something actually occurred. Increased use of leave. All of a sudden you want to take a lot of time off and get away. That could be a marker that something occurred that you're trying to escape from. Around the time the trauma occurred, there's evidence that you started using pregnancy tests or you were tested for STDs. Suddenly you have a disregard for authority. You're telling off your NCOs. You're telling off your CEO for no explainable reason. there's a change in your behavior. And then treatment for injuries related to the personal trauma or military sexual trauma. For instance, I had a client who was hit in the head with a metal pipe, knocked him out before he was sexually assaulted, and he got treated for that head injury while in service, but he did not mention the sexual assault. But along with his story and that head injury, that was enough to prove that something actually occurred. Next, lay statements can be used to help prove a personal trauma or sexual trauma. Now, sometimes there are direct witnesses to it, but not often. If you have a direct witness to the personal trauma or MST, that's great evidence. That's strong evidence that something occurred. But more likely, the lay statements are going to be from people who notice these changes in you. So friends, family, coworkers. He was really outgoing before. Now he's socially isolated. He was a great service member before, always on time. Now he shows up late to formation. His performance has dropped. People who have witnessed these behavioral changes in you can provide statements about that change, and that's pretty good evidence. Sometimes you may have told somebody about the incident, wrote home about it, or called them on the phone. That person can write a statement about what you told them, and that can be used to help prove the personal trauma or MST. And lastly, after the fact, medical opinions could be used to prove the in-service event. Now, this is unique to personal trauma or MST cases. Other PTSD cases, you cannot use a medical opinion to help prove what actually happened in service. But the VA allows this for MST cases. So you could have a psychologist review the record, review lay statements, look at the behavioral changes, look at the behavioral markers, and then conclude whether it's as likely as not something occurred in service, namely personal trauma or sexual trauma. Don't try to do that with a normal PTSD case. After the fact, medical opinions to prove the in-service event are unique to personal trauma or MST cases. Now, don't forget, just proving the in-service event using these markers is just one part of the equation. You also have to have, like I said, a disability or a diagnosis that resulted from that MST. Again, that's typically some sort of mental health condition like PTSD. But as an example I used earlier, it could be things such as TBI from a head injury or other injuries that may have occurred during that event. That does, guys, if you have an MST case, don't give up. They can be difficult to win. Get help if you need it from a VA-accredited attorney. Visit me at vetlawoffice.com. Keep liking, keep sharing, keep subscribing. And as always, you have the power to change your VA.